I arrived exactly 17 minutes late, just in time to hear my mother through the ajar door. "It is wonderful she did not come," my sister chimed in, sweet yet sharp as a hidden blade. "If she were here, we could never make things go smoothly tonight." Frozen on the stone steps with my gift, I finally realized the truth. My family was not waiting for my return. They were waiting for my disappearance. My name is Violet Wakefield. I am 35 years old, and tonight I am exactly 17 minutes late. Briar House stands at the edge of Blackwater Cove in Rhode Island, its massive silhouette casting a jagged, imposing shadow against the navy winter sky. The heavy salt wind whips off the Atlantic Ocean, biting viciously through my wool coat, but the stinging chill on my skin is absolutely nothing compared to the ice rapidly forming in the center of my chest. I bought this coastal estate 5 years ago. I poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into its decaying foundation, hiring crews for 8 solid months to replace the rotting slate roof, rewire the ancient walls, and breathe modern life back into its historic, crumbling bones. I bled for this property so my parents could retire in total peace, securely wrapped in the comfort and prestige they always claimed they deserved but could never actually afford. I should have been sitting inside that warm dining room well before the first bottle of expensive vintage wine was uncorked. However, a massive 5-car pileup on the Coastal Bay Bridge completely paralyzed the northbound lanes, stalling traffic for over 2 hours. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, and red lights painted the freezing fog. When the gridlock became entirely unbearable, I left my sedan parked securely on the shoulder of the highway, choosing to walk the final mile and a half in the freezing, violent wind. My leather boots clicked rhythmically against the frozen asphalt, a steady, marching drumbeat driving me toward what I foolishly thought was an intimate family dinner. I carried a heavy velvet-wrapped box in my left hand, holding a rare crystal decanter for my father. It was a calculated peace offering, meant to soothe the financial tension that had been simmering between us for the past 6 months. I step onto the wide, wraparound mahogany porch. The expensive wood groans softly under my weight, a familiar, domestic sound I used to find deeply comforting. Warm, golden light spills through the slight crack of the ajar front door, painting bright strips of yellow across the frost-covered planks at my feet. I raise my right knuckle to knock against the solid oak frame. I never get the chance. Inside the grand dining room, the sharp, clear ring of a silver fork striking a crystal champagne flute cuts cleanly through the low, sophisticated murmur of conversation. It is my father. His voice is rich, booming, and practiced the exact kind of voice that falsely commands a boardroom and effortlessly charms a dinner table. "To a wonderful evening," my father announces loudly. I can vividly picture him standing proudly at the head of the long oak table, raising his glass high. And let us be completely honest with one another. Tonight is finally peaceful because Violet is not here to control everything. My raised hand freezes midair. The winter wind howls furiously through the bare branches behind me, but the porch is suddenly a silent, suffocating vacuum. Before the initial shock can even fully register in my brain, a second voice slices through the ambient warmth of the room. It is Mallory, my older sister. Her tone is melodic, theatrical, and dripping with that effortless, toxic charm she wears daily, like a designer perfume. "And it is a good thing, too," Mallory laughs, letting out a sharp, cruel sound that grates against my spine. "Because there are a few signatures tonight that she really should not see." I brace myself in the freezing dark. I stand there waiting for my mother to gasp and scold them. I wait for an uncle, a lifelong family friend, or absolutely anyone sitting in that room to clear their throat and awkwardly change the subject. I wait for the basic defense that a loyal daughter and a fiercely protective sister has rightfully earned through years of quietly paying their debts, covering their mistakes, and funding their lavish lifestyle. Instead, I hear laughter. It is not a polite, uncomfortable chuckle. It is a collective, unified wave of genuine amusement echoing off the freshly painted walls I paid for. The rhythmic clinking of expensive glassware immediately follows. A toast. They are actively toasting to my absence. They are celebrating the convenient blind spot they have successfully shoved me into. This is not a careless slip of the tongue fueled by pouring too much wine on an empty stomach. It is a solid consensus. A normal person might shove the heavy oak door open. A normal person might storm directly into the dining room, hurl the heavy velvet box onto the porcelain plates, and scream at the top of their lungs until their throat bled raw. A normal, heartbroken sister might collapse on the porch and cry. I do not do any of those things. The sharp sting of betrayal does not register as a hot burn. It registers as absolute terrifying and surgical clarity. My racing pulse instantly slows down. The chaotic, buzzing noise in my head vanishes entirely, replaced by a cold, calculating hum that settles deep into my bones. I take a slow, perfectly silent half-step backward into the obscuring shadows of the porch. I pull my smartphone from my heavy coat pocket. My fingers do not shake. I open the voice recording application and firmly press the red button. I hold the microphone steady toward the narrow crack in the door. I stand outside in the freezing coastal air, acting as a ghost on my own property, listening closely as my beloved family illegally auctions off the life I built for them. The dining room conversation resumes, much louder now, visibly emboldened by their shared secret. A man with a thick, unfamiliar corporate accent asks a direct question. I do not recognize the voice at all. So, the new investors are completely comfortable with the proposed timeline, the stranger asks, his tone strictly business. Absolutely, Mallory replies, her voice smooth, persuasive, and dripping with unearned confidence. Once the final amendment is officially filed tomorrow morning, operational control shifts entirely to the newly formed trust. The transitional friction will be practically zero. And the current deed holder, another woman asks skeptically, will she pose a legal hurdle? Handled, my father says dismissively, waving the concern away with a single word. Violet is merely a silent partner in name only. The new operational control structure gives Mallory full executive authority over the estate and its revenues. We are fully ready to scale this operation. New investors, operational control, final amendment. The heavy legal terms hit me like physical blows to the stomach, yet my brain processes them with the sterile, clinical detachment of a forensic accountant uncovering a massive fraud. This is not a simple family dinner. This is a clandestine board meeting. This is a hostile corporate coup being staged in my own living room. They are not merely complaining about my overbearing, practical nature behind my back. They are actively, methodically dismantling my legal ownership of Briar House. They are stealing the holding company I built from the ground up to protect this very asset. The recording timer ticks past 3 minutes, then 4 minutes, then 5. I have captured more than enough audio evidence to establish intent. I press stop and immediately save the encrypted file to a secure remote cloud server. The glowing red light on my screen extinguishes into blackness, and with it, the very last lingering illusion I held about the blood running through my veins dies completely. I look down at the expensive velvet-wrapped box still gripped in my left hand. It feels utterly absurd now. It is a pathetic relic from a past life where I was the dutiful, perpetually exhausted caretaker of people who viewed me as nothing more than an unlimited bank account. I do not throw it into the bushes. I bend down slowly, my knees popping softly in the frigid air, and place the box gently on the wooden threshold. I align it perfectly in the exact center of the welcome mat. It is a quiet, undeniable piece of physical proof that I was here. I arrived. I heard everything. I turned my back on the warm, golden light spilling from the dining room. I walk steadily down the mahogany steps, my heels completely silent against the freezing, frost-tipped grass. The harsh wind blowing off the bay hits me head-on, whipping my dark hair violently across my face, but I do not shiver even once. I navigate the dark, winding gravel driveway back toward the coastal road. I walk past the imported wrought iron security gates I paid to install, past the beautifully landscaped winter gardens I pay a monthly retainer to maintain, and out into the pitch-black, unforgiving night. It is a long, freezing walk back to my abandoned car, but my vision has literally never been sharper or more focused. As I finally unlock my sedan and slide into the freezing leather driver's seat, the engine roars to life, and the heater blasts warm air against my numb hands. Yet, the profound chill remains buried deep inside my chest. I grip the leather steering wheel tightly, staring through the windshield at the distant, glowing windows of the grand estate on the hill. Tonight is not the night I was sadly excluded from my family. Tonight is the night I witnessed, with wide-open, unblinking eyes, that my family had spent months meticulously preparing to permanently erase me. They truly think they have won. They think the quiet, practical, responsible sister will just absorb the shocking financial loss, sign whatever fraudulent paperwork they eventually shove in front of her, and dutifully keep paying the insurance bills to keep the peace. They are catastrophically wrong. I put the car into drive and pull smoothly away from the icy curb, leaving Briarhouse behind in the rearview mirror. The war has not even officially started, but as I drive into the dark, I already know exactly how I'm going to end it. 3 years ago, the very concept of family still held a sacred, unbreakable weight in my mind. It was the year my mother suffered a severe arterial blockage, resulting in a terrifying 2-week stint in the cardiac intensive care unit. Around the exact same time, my father was gently but firmly pushed into early retirement by his corporate firm, stripped of his corner office and the massive ego that came with it. The sudden, terrifying lack of a steady income, combined with the crushing anxiety of mounting medical debt, aged them both a full decade in the span of just 3 months. I was 32 years old at the time, aggressively climbing the brutal, highly competitive corporate ladder at Hollowcrest Compliance Group. I traded my 20s for 80-hour work weeks, skipping vacations and personal relationships to build an impenetrable career. That winter, my sacrifices culminated in a massive, multi-tiered executive stock bonus. Most of my senior colleagues immediately bought imported sports cars, acquired second homes in the mountains, or upgraded to sprawling penthouses in the city. I did not buy anything for myself. I bought a permanent sanctuary for my parents. Because of my rigorous professional background in corporate compliance and risk management, I did not just hand over a blank check or sign the property deed blindly. I established a dedicated, shielded holding company, specifically named Wakefield Harbor Holdings, to purchase the historic estate outright. I drafted the operating agreement myself, spending dozens of hours refining the strict legal language. The protective clauses were ironclad and painfully clear. The property could never be leveraged for a mortgage, pledged as collateral for a loan, utilized for commercial business operations, or transferred in ownership without my direct, physical, notarized signature. I honestly thought I was protecting them from predatory lenders, volatile market fluctuations, or their own documented lack of financial literacy. I did not stop at simply buying the house. I paid heavily out of my own pocket to completely gut and replace the ancient, dangerous electrical grid hidden behind the plaster walls. I hired local contractors for 6 months to install a brand new slate roof, modernize the massive chef-style kitchen with top-tier appliances, and meticulously restore the overgrown coastal garden so my mother would have a peaceful place to walk. I even put a highly recommended part-time housekeeper on my personal monthly payroll, so my mother would never have to lift a heavy laundry basket or scrub a floor while her fragile heart healed. I essentially built them a beautiful, impenetrable fortress by the sea, fully funded by my own sweat and exhaustion. Then, there was Mallory. My older sister has always operated under the distinct, unshakable belief that reality is entirely optional, provided you have the right aesthetic lighting and a carefully curated designer wardrobe. She runs a boutique luxury event planning agency called Velvet Ash Events. If you looked solely at her perfectly filtered social media feeds, you would absolutely believe she was a millionaire mogul. She constantly posts highly edited photographs of herself wearing custom silk dresses, standing gracefully in front of elaborate floral arches, holding a crystal glass of imported champagne, and speaking fluently in the hollow buzzwords of a highly successful, self-made entrepreneur. But the digital facade is a spectacular, carefully constructed lie. Velvet Ash Events is wildly famous on the internet, but it is an utter disaster on the actual accounting books. Mallory has always lived permanently on the razor-thin edge of total financial ruin. She consistently prioritizes the visual illusion of wealth over the actual, disciplined accumulation of it. Our parents never once saw her chronic business failures as a fundamental lack of discipline or a refusal to work hard. In their heavily biased eyes, Mallory was the brilliant, chronically misunderstood artist of the family. She was a delicate, highly sensitive, creative soul, desperately trying to navigate a harsh, unfeeling corporate world. They viewed her as a beautiful, fragile child who inherently required constant protection, endless financial grace, and infinite second chances. I, on the completely opposite hand, was the machine. I was the pragmatic, emotionally stoic daughter who coldly negotiated aggressive compliance contracts for a living. I was strong. I could take care of myself. I did not require praise, and I certainly did not require a safety net. Therefore, according to the deeply twisted, unspoken logic of the Wakefield household, it was my fundamental duty to always yield. It was my job to absorb the stress, to quietly handle the logistical nightmares, and to provide the solid, unshakable financial ground for Mallory to dance upon. For over a decade, I played my assigned, miserable role flawlessly. I became the silent, invisible woman who simply paid the exorbitant bills when the lights were about to be shut off or the creditors started calling the house. When Mallory carelessly crashed her leased luxury sport utility vehicle and could not afford the soaring insurance deductible, the glaring invoice quietly found its way to my encrypted email inbox. I paid it without a single complaint. When my parents desperately needed supplemental medical coverage because my father abruptly lost his premium corporate health benefits, I set up an automatic, recurring direct debit directly from my primary checking account. I quietly covered emergency dental surgeries, skyrocketing annual property taxes, and a seemingly endless string of desperate, short-term cash advances to rescue Velvet Ash Events from whatever sudden, catastrophic vendor crisis Mallory had manufactured that specific quarter. "It is just a temporary bridge loan, Violet," she would say over the phone, her voice always dripping with that artificial, sugary sweetness she reserved strictly for when she needed money. "I promise I will pay you back the exact moment this high-profile coastal wedding clears the escrow account." The money never came back. Not a single dollar. It was a completely one-way street, paved entirely with my deeply ingrained sense of familial guilt and their boundless, breathtaking entitlement. Whenever I dared to politely ask about a repayment schedule, my mother would suddenly clutch her chest, complaining about fabricated heart palpitations, while my father would sternly lecture me about the critical importance of family loyalty and how I was being unnecessarily greedy with my corporate salary. So, I learned to stop asking. I learned to just swallow the bitter anger and write the next check. For years, I genuinely believed I was the sturdy glue holding my fragile, complicated family together. I convinced myself that my massive financial sacrifices were necessary shields. Keeping the harsh chaos of the real world away from their front door, I thought I was actively buying their safety. Deep down in the darkest parts of my heart, I secretly thought I was buying their love and their unconditional respect. Tonight, the crushing, humiliating weight of my own foolishness settles deep into my chest, heavy as an iron anchor. I did not save them from anything. By constantly rushing in to catch them before they hit the concrete floor, I merely taught them that the fundamental laws of consequence did not apply to them. I taught them that my hard-earned money was their inherent right. I taught them that my primary purpose for existing in this family was to be harvested like a crop. And worst of all, by always being the reliable woman who blindly paid the bills. I taught them that they could quietly bleed me dry and I would never, ever fight back. I allowed myself to become their favorite victim. That realization hurts far more than the freezing winter wind outside my car window, but it is a severe, sharp pain I desperately need to feel to finally wake up. Exactly 6 months before the night I stood freezing in the dark and listened to them toast to my absence, the foundational fracture of our family actually occurred. It was a humid Tuesday evening late in the summer. Mallory had driven down to Rhode Island unannounced, strolling into the living room with a forced, radiant smile and a thick, professionally bound presentation folder tucked under her arm. She waited until our parents were comfortably seated with their after-dinner tea before she launched into her highly rehearsed pitch. "It is merely a standard bridge loan, Violet," Mallory said, her voice smooth and practiced. She slid the heavy folder across the polished coffee table toward me. "Velvet Ash Events is on the absolute verge of a massive expansion. I am currently in the final stages of negotiating a string of 5 luxury weddings for the upcoming spring season, plus an exclusive multi-year decorating contract for a private coastal country club. I just need a temporary infusion of capital to secure the vendor retainers and upgrade our marketing infrastructure." The bank approved the commercial line of credit, but because my business is technically categorized as high-risk hospitality, they require a secondary guarantor with a pristine, high-tier credit profile. I did not reach for the folder. I sat perfectly still, looking at the glossy cover. "How much is the principal amount, Mallory?" She waved her hand dismissively, as if we were discussing the price of a cup of coffee. "It is only $250,000, and the term is incredibly short. I will have the entire balance cleared in less than 120 days, the exact moment the country club contract clears escrow." My mother leaned forward, her face glowing with unconditional pride. "It sounds like a wonderful opportunity. Violet, your sister is finally breaking into the elite market. You should be so proud of her." I looked up at Mallory. "If the contracts are entirely solid, the bank should lend against your accounts receivable. I will not blindly sign a personal guarantee for $250,000. Before I even consider putting my legal name on a commercial loan document, I need full transparency. I want your general ledger, the last 12 months of corporate bank statements, every active client contract, your vendor aging reports, and the itemized statements for every company credit card." The artificial warmth instantly vanished from Mallory's face. She looked at our parents, her eyes wide and suddenly brimming with theatrical tears. "She does not trust me. I come to her with the biggest milestone of my career, and she treats me like a hostile corporate takeover. Violet, please," my father sighed heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Do not be so difficult. We are a family, not a boardroom. Just review her summary and sign the paper so she can get back to work." "No," I said, keeping my voice entirely flat and devoid of emotion. "I am the senior compliance officer at a major financial firm. My signature legally binds my personal assets. I see the raw data, or the answer is absolutely not." It took 2 agonizing hours of complaining, crying, and aggressive parental guilt-tripping before Mallory finally authorized her accountant to send me the digital files. By the time the encrypted folders arrived in my inbox, the house had gone quiet. I sat alone at the massive oak dining table, opened my laptop, and began the audit. It took me exactly 3 hours to completely dismantle her professional illusion. The financial reality of Velvet Ash Events was not a temporary cash flow problem. It was a catastrophic, undeniable horror show. Mallory was not expanding, she was actively drowning, and she was dragging everyone else down with her. As I cross-referenced the bank deposits with the vendor payouts, the ugly truth emerged with crystal clarity. She was illegally commingling funds. She was taking massive, non-refundable cash deposits from new brides and immediately using that money to pay off the furious catering companies and florists from weddings she had hosted 6 months prior. Worse than the chained vendor debt was the corporate credit card. I scrolled through pages of horrific, completely unjustifiable spending. There were charges for $4,000 at a medical spa in Manhattan, brazenly categorized under client wellness retention. There were monthly charges of $2,000 for leased designer clothing. Written off as marketing overhead, she had literally drained the operating capital of her own company to fund her lavish, fake social media lifestyle, and now the entire house of cards was collapsing. The bridge loan was not for expansion. It was a desperate attempt to stop her vendors from dragging her into civil court for fraud. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I printed the most damning spreadsheets, highlighted the specific fraudulent transactions in bright yellow ink, and walked into the kitchen. My parents and Mallory were sitting around the breakfast island, drinking coffee and laughing softly. The laughter died the second I dropped the stack of papers onto the marble counter. "I am not signing the guarantee," I stated clearly. Mallory slammed her coffee mug down. "You did not even read the business plan, did you? You just looked at the raw numbers." "I looked at the reality," I shot back, tapping the highlighted ledger. "You do not have a business. Mallory, you are running a boutique Ponzi scheme. You are using the deposit from an August wedding to pay the lighting vendor for a January wedding. You expensed $6,000 in luxury resort stays to the company in the last 90 days, while simultaneously defaulting on your warehouse lease. Injecting $250,000 into this structure will not save it. It will merely prolong the death by another 6 months, and when it finally crashes, the bank will legally seize my assets to cover your negligence." My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. Her face was flushed dark red with sudden, blinding fury. "How dare you speak to your sister that way? You are so incredibly cold. Violet, you have absolutely zero empathy. You are just jealous because she creates beauty and joy for a living, and you just sit in a sterile cubicle staring at miserable spreadsheets." "I am staring at a spreadsheet that proves she is committing financial fraud," I replied, refusing to break eye contact or raise my voice. My father stepped in, his expression hardening into a mask of pure corporate disdain. He looked at me not as a daughter, but as an insubordinate employee. "You operate exactly like a machine, Violet. You only see risk and liability. You have absolutely no vision. A creative mind like your sister needs a financial runway to truly launch. You make more money in a single annual bonus than most people see in 5 years. You could easily back her, but you are choosing to be selfish over a few accounting errors." "They are not errors," I said, my chest tightening with a sharp, familiar ache. "It is theft, and I am entirely done funding it." I looked around the beautiful, expensive kitchen I had purchased for them. I looked at the 3 people who viewed me solely as a protective shield and an endless wallet. Something fundamental permanently snapped inside my mind. "Since I am clearly a machine," I continued, my voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous register, "I am going to start operating like one. I am refusing the loan guarantee. Furthermore, the personal subsidies end today. I will continue to pay the property taxes, the structural insurance, and the basic utility bills for this house, because I promised I would keep a roof over your heads. But the secondary credit cards attached to my primary account are being canceled at noon. I am no longer paying for Mallory's car lease. I am no longer covering the premium cable packages, the luxury grocery deliveries, or the impromptu weekend vacations. If you want those things, you will have to pay for them yourselves." The silence in the kitchen was absolute and deafening. They stared at me in total shock, as if I had just spoken to them in an alien language. I did not wait for a rebuttal. I turned around, walked out of the kitchen, and drove back to the city. I genuinely thought I was imposing necessary, healthy boundaries to keep my family from completely destroying themselves. I thought the shock of being cut off would force them to finally wake up and take responsibility for their own survival. I was dangerously naive. I did not realize until much later that my refusal did not cure their entitlement. It merely redirected it. By cutting off their easy access to my liquid cash, I transformed myself from the reliable pillar of the family into the ultimate traitor. I stopped being their daughter and their sister. I became an obstacle, and as I would eventually learn the hard way, they were more than willing to eliminate an obstacle. Just over 4 weeks after I drove away from that catastrophic breakfast, the digital landscape of my sister's life shifted dramatically. Instead of the desperate silence I expected from a collapsed business, Mallory's social media feeds exploded with unprecedented opulence. She posted a photograph casually leaning against the hood of a brand-new, pearl-white luxury sedan that easily cost upwards of $90,000. The caption mentioned something incredibly vague about new beginnings and manifesting massive success. A few days later, There were high-definition videos of her apartment filled with imported Italian leather furniture, vintage French rugs, and custom velvet evening gowns. The weekend trips resumed with aggressive frequency. She tagged herself at elite vineyards and exclusive ski lodges where a single night cost more than her previous monthly rent. The math simply did not work. I knew exactly what her balance sheets looked like 30 days ago. Velvet Ash Events was a sinking ship strapped to a concrete block. A sudden, massive influx of liquid cash of this magnitude was not just improbable, it was completely impossible through legitimate channels. The deeply unsettling displays of wealth were not restricted to her personal life. The changes began to physically manifest at the estate itself. I drove by the property one damp Tuesday evening on my way back from a client meeting in Boston, intending only to do a quiet drive-by to ensure the exterior was being properly maintained by the landscaping crew. I slowed my car to a cautious crawl as I approached the property line. The original, understated wooden gate I had chosen specifically to blend in with the historic neighborhood was entirely gone. In its place stood massive, ornate wrought iron double doors, flanked by freshly laid stone pillars. A heavy brass plaque was bolted to the masonry, gleaming aggressively under the streetlights. It did not just politely announce the family name, it featured a stylized, commercial crest. As I drove further up the winding road to get a better vantage point of the rear grounds, I saw that the landscape lighting had been drastically upgraded. Hundreds of commercial-grade, warm white bulbs illuminated the sweeping lawns like a theatrical stage. More disturbingly, the detached carriage house near the rear gardens, a structure we previously used strictly for lawnmower and seasonal storage, glowed brightly from within. Through the newly installed French windows, I could clearly see custom drapery and modern crystal chandeliers. It had been entirely gutted and transformed into a high-end reception lounge. My heart hammered painfully against my ribs. I had not authorized a single construction permit. I had not released a single dollar from the holding company accounts for renovations. The crushing sense of paranoia drove me directly to Naomi Price. Naomi and I had shared a cramped dormitory room during our freshman year of college, and she now operated as a senior forensic researcher specializing in commercial property records and corporate registries for a massive downtown law firm. We met for coffee on a rainy Thursday morning. I slid my phone across the wooden table, showing her the photographs I had taken of the new gates and the transformed carriage house. I asked her to run a quiet, routine check on the municipal zoning records, expecting to find that my family was simply modifying the property illegally without permits. I was entirely unprepared for what she actually found. 4 hours later, my phone rang. Naomi did not bother with a polite greeting. "I pulled the municipal filings for the town of Blackwater Cove," Naomi said, her voice uncharacteristically tight and strictly professional. "There is an active temporary commercial event permit attached directly to the exact address of Briar House. It is not filed under Mallory's failing company. It is filed directly under your holding company name." My breathing grew suddenly shallow. I asked Naomi to send me the digital copies of the municipal filings immediately. When the encrypted file arrived in my inbox, I locked my office door, drew the blinds, and opened the document. There, on the third page of the municipal application, was a legally binding document designating the primary site manager and assuming full operational liability for large-scale commercial gatherings. The name printed clearly in the designated box was Violet Wakefield. I stared at the glowing screen until my vision blurred. I had never seen this document before in my entire life. I traced the curves of the signature at the bottom of the page with my index finger. It was incredibly close to my actual handwriting, mimicking the sharp angles of my initials almost perfectly, but it lacked the fluid, confident pressure of my actual pen stroke. Someone had meticulously forged my signature to officially convert my private, residential sanctuary into a fully licensed commercial event venue. The cold, terrifying realization of what was actually happening required an immediate, surgical escalation. I could no longer handle this by simply locking my personal bank accounts or refusing to answer phone calls. I reached out to Adrian Vale, a ruthless, highly discreet civil litigator whom my firm occasionally retained for extremely complex corporate disputes. Adrian took one single look at the forged municipal permit and immediately brought in Gideon Shaw, a private financial investigator who specialized exclusively in tracing obscured corporate liabilities and hidden assets. We convened in Adrian's soundproof conference room on a gloomy Friday afternoon. I laid out the original operating agreement I had drafted 3 years prior, highlighting the strict clauses that absolutely forbade any commercial use or leveraging of the property without my physical presence and notarized consent. I told them to find the hidden money. I needed to know exactly how my family was funding the heavy iron gates, the expensive crystal chandeliers, and Mallory's brand new luxury vehicle. Gideon worked in absolute terrifying silence for 3 solid days. When he finally requested a follow-up meeting, he did not bring a simple written report. He brought a heavy, imposing stack of legally binding vendor contracts. He laid them out on the polished mahogany table one by one. The sheer scope of the hidden operation was staggering. He had successfully uncovered a massive, deeply interconnected web of long-term vendor agreements. There was a binding contract with a premier regional liquor distributor for bi-weekly bulk deliveries. There was a specialized, high-cost service agreement with an industrial lighting firm. There was a massive, multi-tiered contract with a luxury tent and commercial staging company. Every single one of these specialized agreements required a substantial, non-refundable deposit. Every single one was firmly established to service high-capacity, luxury events. My eyes scanned the bold header of the first vendor agreement. I fully expected to see Velvet Ash Events listed as the primary contractor. I expected Mallory to be using the physical house illegally, but shielding herself legally with her own corporate entity, I was completely wrong. The commercial contracts were not signed by her failing company. They were executed directly under the name of Wakefield Harbor Holdings, my company, the precise legal entity I had carefully created to protect myself. "Look right here on page 6, Gideon said, pointing a thick, calloused finger at the liability clause buried deeply in the staging contract. His voice was entirely devoid of sympathy, as he clearly explained the exact nature of the trap I was currently standing in. Mallory is aggressively booking high-end coastal events, taking massive cash deposits from unsuspecting new clients, and funneling that money directly into the property upgrades and her own personal bank account. But she is legally completely insulated from the fallout. She structured every single one of these new vendor agreements so that the holding company bears the absolute entirety of the risk." Adrian leaned forward, folding his hands over the forged documents. If a wealthy client sues for breach of contract, if a lighting vendor is not paid their invoice, or if an intoxicated guest is severely injured on the property during a massive reception, the devastating legal blow will bypass your sister entirely. The furious creditors and the massive civil lawsuits will immediately target the holding company. They will legally target the sole registered owner. The chilling, horrifying truth finally settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket of winter snow. If these newly forged contracts shattered, the first person legally responsible, the person who would face complete financial ruin and potential criminal fraud charges, was not the sister who orchestrated the elaborate lie. It was me. They had not merely stolen my house behind my back to throw parties. They had meticulously weaponized my own protective legal structure, actively turning my deepest act of familial generosity into a loaded weapon pointed directly at my own head. The heavy soundproof oak door of Adrian Vale's downtown law office closed with a definitive, echoing thud, sealing me inside the freezing, perfectly air-conditioned conference room. It had been exactly 48 hours since we uncovered the disastrous vendor contracts. I sat at the head of the massive glass table, my spine perfectly straight, bracing myself for whatever new financial wreckage my legal team had managed to excavate from the public records. Adrian stood near the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the gray, sprawling city skyline, while Naomi rapidly shuffled a massive stack of freshly printed, deeply complicated legal filings. The atmosphere in the room was completely devoid of professional triumph. It felt distinctly like a morgue just before the coroner pulled back the sheet. Adrian finally turned away from the glass. He did not sit down. He unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket, walked to the table, and placed a single, terrifyingly thin manila folder directly in front of me. "We completely misunderstood their initial strategy," Adrian began, his voice dropping to a severe clinical register. "When Naomi first found the commercial event permits, we naturally assumed your family was simply running an illegal, unpermitted business on your property. When Gideon found the vendor contracts, we assumed they were just brazenly hiding behind your corporate shield. We were thinking far too small." Violet: "We assumed they were just stealing the house to get a traditional commercial mortgage." Naomi leaned forward, her dark eyes flashing with a mixture of profound professional respect and absolute disgust. "They did not take out a traditional mortgage. Banks require exhaustive due diligence, mandatory structural appraisals, and direct, in-person interviews with the primary guarantor. Mallory knew she could never pass a legitimate bank audit, so they completely bypassed the traditional banking sector. They went straight to aggressive, unregulated private equity." I stared at the closed folder. How is that even mathematically possible? Private equity firms require collateral. They require absolute proof of ownership. They cannot borrow against an asset they do not legally possess. "They can," Adrian replied, tapping his index finger sharply against the manila cover. "If they legally rewrite the definition of who possesses it." I opened the folder. The very first document was a heavily stamped, officially registered filing from the Secretary of State. The bold header across the top of the page read, "First Amendment to the Master Operating Agreement of Wakefield Harbor Holdings." My eyes darted across the dense, tightly packed legal paragraphs. The original, ironclad corporate structure I had built to protect my parents had been completely obliterated. According to this newly filed public document, my holding company had undergone a massive, structural reorganization exactly 2 months ago. I was no longer the sole, undisputed managing member. The fraudulent amendment explicitly dissolved my absolute executive authority. "Read the 4th paragraph," Naomi instructed, her voice tight with restrained anger. I forced my eyes down the page. The document proudly established a brand new, completely fabricated entity called the Wakefield Family Trust. The amendment systematically stripped away my voting rights and transferred 95% of the total corporate control directly to this new trust. My father was legally appointed as the primary trustee, granting him total, unchecked authority over the physical real estate. Mallory was officially designated as the exclusive director of corporate operations, giving her absolute control over the bank accounts and all commercial activities. I was brutally downgraded to a silent, powerless minority shareholder, holding a pathetic 5% stake with absolutely zero voting power and zero ability to block any financial transactions. "They did not just borrow against your house," Adrian stated, his tone razor-sharp and utterly merciless. "They executed a complete, hostile corporate takeover of your entire holding company. They legally voted you out of your own property." I stared at the bottom of the page. There, perfectly centered above a thick black line, was my signature. It was an exquisite, terrifyingly accurate forgery. "How did they get this past the state registry?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, entirely hollowed out by the sheer, staggering scale of the betrayal. Naomi slid a secondary piece of paper across the glass. "I ran a full forensic digital analysis on the ink stroke. It is not an original signature. It is a high-resolution optical scan. They lifted your exact signature directly from a comprehensive homeowner insurance renewal policy you physically signed in their kitchen 2 years ago. They cropped it, enhanced the contrast, and printed it directly onto the new corporate amendment." "And the notary?" I asked, my blood running entirely cold. "The state requires a certified notary public to verify the identity of the signatory." "Lydia Kersey," Adrian answered, tossing a background report onto the table. "She is a mobile, independent notary operating out of a strip mall in a neighboring county. She has a highly documented, deeply shady history of aggressively looking the other way for a premium cash fee." She stamped your forged signature without ever requesting your physical identification or requiring you to be in the room. With this impenetrable wall of fake legal authority firmly in place, Mallory had weaponized Briarhouse. She was no longer just a failing event planner. Legally speaking, she was the authorized executive director of a multi-million-dollar coastal estate. She immediately used that stolen authority to solicit massive, non-refundable cash deposits from wealthy brides and aggressive retail investors, promising them exclusive access to the premier new venue in Rhode Island. But the horror did not stop at stolen deposits. Adrian pulled a deeply complex, aggressively worded financial contract from the back of the folder. To fund the massive structural renovations and cover her previous debts, Mallory secured a massive influx of capital from a syndicate of private, hard money lenders. Adrian explained, his jaw tight. But because she could not offer a traditional mortgage, she signed something infinitely worse. She executed a confession of judgment against Wakefield Harbor Holdings. I felt the remaining oxygen leave my lungs. As a senior compliance officer, I knew exactly what a confession of judgment was. It was a financial suicide pact. It was a deeply toxic, predatory legal instrument primarily used in the darkest corners of commercial finance. If she misses a single monthly payment to these private lenders, I said, reciting the catastrophic legal reality aloud, if she defaults by even one single day, the lenders do not have to file a lawsuit. They do not have to take her to court or win a trial. Exactly, Adrian confirmed grimly. The confession of judgment means your company has already legally admitted absolute guilt in advance. The moment she defaults, the lenders can march directly into a courthouse, immediately freeze all corporate bank accounts, and instantly seize the physical deed to Briarhouse. And because you are still listed as a minority shareholder and the original founder, you will be named in the subsequent civil fraud lawsuits when the other investors realize their money is completely gone. I leaned back in the heavy leather chair. The ceiling of the conference room seemed to spin slightly. They had not just stolen my money. They had meticulously constructed a devastating high-speed cash machine entirely controlled by Mallory, while deliberately dumping the absolute entirety of the catastrophic legal risk squarely onto my shoulders. When the inevitable collapse happened, Mallory would simply walk away, claiming she was just a hired director, while I would be completely destroyed. There is one final piece of the puzzle, Naomi said quietly. She did not sound angry anymore. She just sounded deeply sad for me. She reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a glossy, beautifully designed promotional brochure printed on heavy, expensive cardstock. This is the official pitch deck Mallory has been quietly sending to high-net-worth investors across the New England coast to secure their capital, Naomi explained, placing the brochure gently in front of me. I opened the heavy cover. The brochure featured stunning, highly edited drone photography of my house, alongside wildly inflated financial projections for the upcoming wedding season. But it was the third page that made my stomach turn. It was a page dedicated to the corporate leadership team. There was a glamorous photograph of Mallory, listed as the visionary executive director. Below her, there was a professionally written biography of our father, praising his decades of corporate leadership, and right at the bottom of the page, printed in crisp, elegant font, was my name, Violet Wakefield, Senior Corporate Compliance Officer at Hollowcrest Compliance Group. The accompanying paragraph proudly described me as the brilliant, silent founder who had strategically delegated all daily operations to her wildly talented sister in order to focus strictly on overarching financial security. The final, sickening layer of the betrayal slammed into me with the force of a freight train. Mallory was not just stealing my physical property. She was actively wearing my pristine, hard-earned professional reputation like a stolen suit. She knew her own name was completely toxic in the financial world. So she used my unblemished corporate resume, my specific job title, and my spotless credit history to aggressively sell a massive, fraudulent lie to wealthy investors. She was using the very career I sacrificed my 20s to build as the primary bait for her trap. I closed the glossy brochure, I placed my hands flat against the cold glass table. The burning sting of familial heartbreak was entirely gone, completely replaced by a freezing, absolute legal clarity. They had built a perfect, inescapable cage of paper and lies, and they were fully prepared to lock me inside it forever. They just made one catastrophic, fatal error. They forgot that I was the one who taught them how to read the contracts in the first place. While my investigative team was meticulously pulling apart the fraudulent corporate structure piece by piece, an unexpected piece of physical mail arrived at my city apartment. It was a heavy cream-colored envelope, sealed with a distinct, embossed wax stamp. The stationery was incredibly expensive, the kind of heavy cardstock that practically whispered old money and forced civility. I recognized the flowing, overly ornate cursive handwriting on the front immediately. It was my mother. I stood in the center of my kitchen, holding the thick envelope under the harsh, modern glow of the recessed lighting. Inside was a handwritten invitation to a private family dinner at Briar House, scheduled for the upcoming Friday evening. The tone of the letter was jarringly soft, dripping with a manufactured maternal warmth that made my stomach physically turn. She wrote that she was entirely exhausted by our ongoing Cold War. She claimed that the prolonged silence between us was breaking her heart. The final sentence was carefully underlined twice for dramatic emotional emphasis. She wrote that it was time for us to finally sit down as a family like adults before the winter holiday season officially began. Less than 2 hours after I opened the physical letter, my phone vibrated quietly on the marble counter. A text message from Mallory illuminated the screen. It was perfectly timed to coordinate with our mother's emotional ambush. "I know things have been incredibly tense between us," the message read. "I want to sincerely apologize for being so hot-headed a few months ago. I was stressed, and I took it out on you. Mom and Dad really want us all to be together this Friday. I am making some massive, positive changes, and I truly want my sister there to witness a new beginning. Please come." I stared at the glowing pixels on my phone screen. A few months ago, reading an apology like that from my older sister would have brought tears of absolute relief to my eyes. I would have instantly believed that the rigid boundaries I had enforced were finally working. I would have felt the heavy, suffocating weight of family conflict lift from my shoulders. But standing there with the absolute knowledge of their massive financial crimes locked securely in my safe, the polite words felt entirely different. They did not feel like a genuine olive branch. They felt exactly like a meticulously polished, razor-sharp hunting trap. I took the physical letter and the screenshot of the text message directly to Adrian Vale's office the following morning. The senior litigator did not even bother to sit down when I handed the evidence across his desk. He read the cursive handwriting, his eyes narrowing into sharp, cynical slits. "This is not a reconciliation," Adrian stated flatly, tossing the expensive cream-colored paper onto his leather blotter. "This is a highly calculated public relations maneuver. It is a staging event." "Why would they want me there?" I asked, pacing the length of his office. "They have already forged my signature. They have legally locked me out of the corporate voting structure. They have complete, unchecked control over the physical estate and the incoming cash flow. Having me physically present in the house only increases the risk that I might notice the massive landscaping changes or accidentally stumble across a vendor contract." Adrian shook his head slowly. "You are thinking like a rational, honest person. Violet, you need to think like a corporate predator. Look at the timeline. Mallory is actively soliciting massive amounts of capital from high-net-worth investors. She is selling them a beautiful, highly profitable lie based entirely on your pristine professional reputation, but sophisticated investors are naturally paranoid. If they are preparing to hand over hundreds of thousands of dollars to a newly formed family trust, they are going to want to perform some basic, informal due diligence." Naomi, who was sitting on the leather sofa reviewing a fresh stack of bank records, looked up. Adrian is exactly right. A wealthy investor might ask to simply meet the brilliant, silent founder they read about in the promotional brochure. If you are noticeably absent, or if Mallory claims you are completely estranged, it raises a massive red flag. The investors might suddenly demand to see the original operating agreements to ensure the title is actually clean. They need your physical presence to legitimize the entire theft, Adrian concluded, his voice utterly devoid of warmth. They need you to show up, drink a glass of expensive wine, smile politely at their wealthy guests, and unknowingly play the role of the supportive sister. They are inviting you to your own financial execution, and they expect you to happily clap for the executioner. He advised me to completely ignore the invitation. He suggested we immediately file an emergency injunction to formally freeze the holding company assets and drag them aggressively into a public courtroom before the Friday dinner could even take place. I refused. I sat down in the heavy leather chair across from Adrian and folded my hands firmly in my lap. If I strike them right now, before the new money changes hands, my parents will instantly launch a massive defense campaign. They will claim the forged documents were just a terrible, unfortunate clerical error made by an overzealous notary. They will cry in front of a judge and say, "It is just a tragic family misunderstanding over estate planning." I do not want them to have the luxury of an excuse. I want them to believe their trap worked flawlessly. The more comfortable they feel, the more careless they will become. I told Adrian I was going to accept the invitation. I was going to walk directly into the snare they had set for me, not out of a desperate, lingering hope for familial healing, but because allowing them to believe I was still their blind, obedient victim was the absolute sharpest weapon I currently possessed. The true depths of their depravity were fully confirmed exactly 48 hours before the scheduled dinner. Gideon Shaw urgently requested an encrypted video conference with my legal team. He had successfully breached the digital firewall of a highly exclusive boutique hospitality investment group based in Connecticut. I tracked the digital footprint of the promotional brochures Mallory has been mailing out, Gideon reported, his rough voice crackling slightly over the secure audio feed. She is not just fishing for small, local retail investors anymore. She has successfully hooked a major, multi-million-dollar syndicate. They specialize in acquiring and scaling luxury coastal venues. Gideon shared his screen, displaying a heavily branded, highly confidential digital itinerary that Mallory had personally emailed to the lead investors of the Connecticut group just 3 days prior. It outlined a comprehensive, luxurious weekend tour of the Rhode Island coastline, culminating in a lavish, catered event at Briar House on Friday evening. The blood drained completely from my face as I read the bold, capitalized heading for the Friday night schedule. It was the exact date and time of my supposed intimate family reconciliation dinner. The document did not mention a quiet family gathering. It did not mention two parents wanting to sit down with their daughters like adults to heal old emotional wounds. The formal itinerary explicitly labeled the evening as a private donor dinner and signature night. The phrase hit me with a sickening, violent clarity, a signature night. They were not just introducing the investors to the property, they were planning to officially execute the final, legally binding financial contracts to secure the massive influx of new capital. The warm, inviting letter from my mother. The seemingly vulnerable text message from my sister. The entire grand illusion of family healing, it was all nothing but a heavy velvet curtain designed to completely obscure a hostile, multi-million-dollar corporate takeover. I understood the absolute entirety of the assignment then. They wanted me to be the quiet, polite background decoration. They wanted me to provide the comforting illusion of family stability while they secretly sold the house out from under me. On Thursday afternoon, I walked into an elite crystal boutique in the city center. I purchased a rare, incredibly expensive crystal decanter, the exact kind of pretentious, high-end gift my father always expected but would never buy for himself. I asked the clerk to wrap it meticulously in heavy dark velvet. It was the perfect, convincing prop. It was the ultimate physical manifestation of the yielding, eager-to-please daughter they fully expected to walk through their new iron gates. I packed a small overnight bag. I reviewed the forged documents one final time, burning the fake signature into my memory. As I prepared to drive up the coast toward Rhode Island, my heart did not race with anxiety or break with sorrow. It beat with a steady, terrifying rhythm of absolute resolve. They invited the woman who always paid their bills and quietly absorbed their abuse. But that woman was already dead. The person driving to Briar House on Friday night was simply the ghost arriving to collect the final debt. The grand dining room had been transformed into a signing room for the Connecticut Syndicate. Mallory stood beneath the chandeliers beside a presentation board showing Briar House not as a home, but as a future hospitality empire. When one of the investors asked whether I would interfere with the transfer, my father answered without hesitation, "Do not worry about Violet. She will not be making an appearance tonight." In that instant, I understood the invitation for what it really was. They had timed the so-called family dinner to keep me trapped in traffic while they closed the deal behind my back. I recorded every word, documented the investors' vehicles on my way back to the road, and called Adrian from my car with the confirmation we needed. When I finally reached my sedan parked safely on the shoulder of the dark coastal road, I locked the heavy doors and immediately dialed Adrian Vale. The Bluetooth audio system connected automatically, filling the quiet, freezing cabin of my car with his sharp, strictly professional voice. "I am parked outside the property boundary," I said, my voice completely stripped of any recognizable human emotion. "They are all inside right now. Mallory is currently presenting the venue expansion boards to the Connecticut Syndicate. They are preparing to officially sign the binding financial commitments tonight." Adrian did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. "Do you want me to contact the local authorities right now? Or do you want to walk through the front door and physically stop the transaction? We have more than enough preliminary documentary evidence to completely halt the signing and freeze the room." I stared through the freezing windshield at the distant, glowing windows of my stolen house. A younger, slightly more naive version of myself would have kicked the heavy front door wide open. She would have marched directly into the dining room, screamed at the top of her lungs, and desperately tried to save her parents from committing a massive, irreversible federal crime. But that exhausted, loyal daughter had died on the front porch just a few moments ago. "No," I replied firmly, my grip tightening around the leather steering wheel. "We do absolutely nothing. Violet, listen to me," Adrian warned, his tone instantly shifting into a register of deep, urgent legal concern. "If they successfully execute those commercial contracts tonight, the legal entanglement becomes exponentially worse. The new investor capital will officially enter the fraudulent trust accounts. Unwinding a completed wire transfer of that magnitude will take months of aggressive litigation." "I know exactly what the mechanics are," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "If I walk into that dining room right now and stop them from signing, they will immediately spin the narrative to their advantage. My mother will start sobbing hysterically. My father will claim it was just a preliminary, harmless brainstorming session. Mallory will tell the investors that I am just a deeply jealous, unstable sister causing a dramatic family dispute over an inheritance. I will absolutely not give them the luxury of minimizing this crime. I will not let them pretend this is just a misunderstanding. I needed the crime to be absolute. I needed the legal threshold to cross firmly from a messy civil family dispute directly into undeniable, highly documented commercial fraud. "Let them sign the papers," I instructed my lawyer, my voice echoing coldly in the dark interior of the car. "Let them take the investors' money. Let them commit to the massive lies on legally binding paper. I want them to step so far over the line that there is absolutely no possibility of turning back. I want them to firmly, joyfully lock their own handcuffs." Adrian remained completely silent on the other end of the line for a long, heavy moment before finally exhaling. "I understand your strategy completely. We wait for the ink to dry." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. For the first time in my entire adult life, the crushing, instinctual urge to protect my family from the devastating consequences of their own actions was completely gone. I was no longer the exhausted caretaker frantically running around with a bucket of water to put out the fires they constantly started. I chose to sit quietly in the freezing dark, watching the flames rise higher and higher against the night sky. I decided to step back and let the brutal truth grow big enough, heavy enough, and undeniably real enough to completely crush them. Exactly 4 days after I stood freezing in the dark outside that dining room, the public execution of my character officially began. I was sitting at my desk in the city when my phone illuminated with a notification. It was a post from Mallory. She uploaded a carousel of highly edited, perfectly lit photographs showcasing the newly renovated carriage house. The caption beneath the images was a masterclass in weaponized victimhood. Reviving our beautiful family legacy from the absolute ashes of selfish, toxic control, she wrote. So incredibly blessed to finally step into my power and protect the people I love. The digital strike was merely the opening salvo. Within 48 hours, the insidious whispers began circulating through our extended family network. My aunt called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice dripping with extreme disappointment, asking how I could possibly consider forcibly evicting my own frail mother and retired father just to sell the estate for a quick profit. Mallory and my parents had meticulously seeded a horrific, completely fabricated narrative. They were telling every single relative and mutual acquaintance that I was insanely jealous of Mallory's sudden entrepreneurial success. They claimed I was a cold, calculating corporate monster who viewed our family solely as a financial burden and was actively trying to destroy my sister's bright future out of sheer spite. The social assassination was swiftly followed by a barrage of aggressive legal intimidation. A thick, certified envelope arrived at my firm by private courier. Inside was a freshly drafted, heavily notarized set of corporate meeting minutes. According to this completely fictitious document, the newly formed board of directors had held an emergency vote. They formally resolved to completely restrict my physical access to Briar House, citing that my erratic behavior poses a severe, unmanageable risk to ongoing business operations. Tucked directly behind the fake minutes was a viciously worded letter from a high-powered commercial attorney representing the private lending syndicate. The letter was a formal legal threat. It explicitly warned me that any attempt to obstruct the daily operations of the venue, or any effort to contact the new investors, would be aggressively prosecuted as a direct breach of my fiduciary duties as a minority shareholder. They were brazenly using my own stolen company to threaten me with absolute financial ruin if I dared to step onto my own grass. The poison quickly began to bleed into my professional sphere. A few prominent event coordinators in the city, people I occasionally interacted with for corporate retreats, started treating me with noticeable, icy distance. The carefully constructed lie was spreading fast, painting me as an unhinged, authoritarian dictator. For the very first time in my decade-long career, the pristine professional reputation I had bled to build was actively taking collateral damage. A normal person would have immediately taken to the internet to defend themselves. A normal person would have called their relatives screaming the truth. I did absolutely nothing of the sort. I did not post a single rebuttal. I did not return the angry phone calls. I simply let them scream their lies into the void. While I sat in Adrian Vale's soundproof office and quietly built an absolute, impenetrable fortress of concrete evidence, we moved with terrifying, surgical precision. I authorized my firm's information technology department to completely image and back up every single email and digital communication I had sent or received over the past 3 years. Adrian brought in digital forensics experts to aggressively cross-check the metadata on every single document Mallory had filed with the state. We pulled the precise global positioning satellite history from my cellular provider, creating an undeniable, minute-by-minute digital map of my physical locations for the past 12 months. More importantly, I handed Gideon Shaw the encrypted login credentials to the discreet, exterior security cameras I had personally installed along the roofline of Briar House 2 years ago. My parents had completely forgotten those cameras even existed. Gideon downloaded hundreds of hours of high-definition video footage, perfectly documenting the unauthorized construction crews, the arrival of the luxury caterers, and the steady stream of wealthy investors walking through the new iron gates. Then, on a rainy Thursday morning, Naomi Price burst into the conference room holding a single, heavily highlighted piece of paper. Her hands were actually shaking with adrenaline. "I found the kill shot," Naomi announced, her voice echoing sharply against the glass walls. She slammed the document down onto the mahogany table. It was the official, notarized transfer of power, the exact document that stripped me of my company. Look closely at the date and the exact timestamp placed by Lydia Kersey, the corrupt notary. I leaned over the table. The official state seal declared that I had supposedly sat in a room with the notary and signed away my multi-million-dollar estate at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the 14th day of October. A slow, cold smile finally spread across my face. The 14th of October. I repeated the date aloud, the absolute perfection of the mistake washing over me. "Exactly," Adrian said, catching on immediately. "Where were you on the 14th of October at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon?" "I was standing on a brightly lit stage in the primary auditorium of Hollowcrest Compliance Group," I answered, my voice steady and completely triumphant. "I was delivering a mandatory 90-minute annual risk management presentation. I was physically standing in front of over 50 senior executive vice presidents, a panel of federal regulators, and the entire legal compliance department. The entire presentation was recorded on 4 different high-definition corporate cameras for internal training purposes." Naomi laughed out loud, a sharp, victorious sound. "They forged your signature on the exact day and time you had an ironclad, highly documented alibi witnessed by 50 of the most aggressive lawyers and financial regulators in the entire city. The notary's stamp is absolute, provable perjury. We had the weapon we needed to completely destroy the legal foundation of their theft. But before Adrian could even draft the emergency injunction, the scope of Mallory's criminality suddenly expanded far beyond our own family. My personal cell phone rang late that same evening. The caller identification displayed an unknown number. When I answered, a woman's voice came through the speaker, sounding entirely terrified and on the verge of a panic attack. She identified herself as the primary owner of a high-end floral boutique located just down the coast. "I am so sorry to bother you, Violet," the florist whispered, her voice trembling violently. "But I did not know who else to call. I know Mallory is your sister, and I know your name is on the holding company for the estate. Take a deep breath," I instructed calmly. "Tell me exactly what is happening." "Mallory hired me to provide the massive floral installations for the private investor dinner last Friday," the woman explained, her words rushing out in a desperate flood. "The invoice was for $12,000. She wired the money directly to my business account yesterday, but my bank just flagged the transaction. They traced the origin of the routing numbers. The money did not come from a corporate operating account, Violet." I sat up perfectly straight, the air in my apartment suddenly feeling incredibly thin. Where did the wire transfer originate? She used the direct escrow accounts of 3 separate, upcoming brides, the florist sobbed quietly. She literally took the non-refundable venue deposits from 3 innocent women who are getting married next spring, combined their money, and used it to pay for the extravagant dinner to impress the new investors. It is total fraud. If those brides find out their money is completely gone, they are going to sue everyone involved. And the commercial contracts I signed specifically list your name as the ultimate financial guarantor. I closed my eyes, listening to the terrified woman crying on the other end of the line. The situation had mutated from a painful familial betrayal into a massive multi-tiered commercial Ponzi scheme. Mallory was not just stealing from me anymore. She was actively robbing innocent, trusting clients to fund her elaborate corporate theater, and she was doing it all under the protective shield of my stolen identity. "Listen to me very carefully," I told the florist, my voice projecting absolute, unshakable authority. "Do not confront my sister. Do not send her an email. Do not alert the brides just yet. Send every single invoice, every text message, and the exact routing numbers from that wire transfer directly to my legal team by tomorrow morning. I promise you, you will not take the fall for this." I ended the call and stood up, walking over to the large window overlooking the glowing city streets. My family had spent the last week desperately trying to paint me as a villain in a petty domestic dispute. They thought burying me under a mountain of social media lies and fake corporate threats would force me into total submission. They were completely oblivious to the fact that while they were busy playing loud, messy public relations games, I had quietly gathered enough federal evidence to bury them all under the concrete floor of a state penitentiary. The net was fully woven. It was finally time to pull it completely shut. I sat across from Adrian Vale, my posture rigid, fully prepared to authorize the immediate filing of the injunction. I wanted to drop the heavy legal hammer right then and there. I wanted to instantly freeze the bank accounts, lock the newly installed iron gates, and watch my family panic in real time as their fraudulent empire evaporated into nothing. But Adrian held up his hand, his expression calculating and intensely sharp. "We need to hold our fire, Violet," Adrian advised, leaning back in his heavy leather chair. "If we strike them today, this remains a highly complicated, messy civil dispute over property rights and forged operating agreements. The local prosecutors might even hesitate to pick it up, viewing it simply as a toxic family feud. We need to let them commit a crime so massive, so undeniable, that the authorities have absolutely no choice but to intervene with maximum force." He slid a glossy, beautifully designed digital flyer across the polished mahogany desk. It was an exclusive invitation to the Winter Masquerade Gala, scheduled to be held at Briar House in exactly 2 weeks. This was not merely a festive holiday party for the local elite. According to our intercepted communications, this gala was the official closing ceremony for the Connecticut Investment Syndicate. At this specific event, Adrian explained, tapping the heavy cardstock, Mallory is scheduled to sign the final, legally binding investment agreements in front of a room full of wealthy witnesses. If that massive commercial transaction occurs, and the new capital officially transfers into the fraudulent trust accounts controlled by your sister, the entire situation fundamentally changes. It instantly escalates from a state-level forgery case into massive, multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud. The criminal threshold is crossed permanently, and the prison sentences become mandatory. I stared at the ornate masks printed on the invitation. The strategy was absolutely flawless. I agreed to wait. We would let them build the pyre higher, let them pour the gasoline themselves, and happily hand them the match. While we counted down the days to the gala, Gideon Shaw actively hunted down the absolute weakest link in their armor. He did not go after my family. He went directly after the corrupt infrastructure that enabled them. The mobile notary, Lydia Kersey, was already growing deeply paranoid. Gideon did not approach her like a thug in a dark alley. He approached her in broad daylight, wearing an impeccable tailored suit and carrying a thick leather briefcase filled with draft subpoenas. Gideon intercepted Lydia as she was leaving a cheap diner on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. He did not raise his voice. He simply handed her a printed document detailing her exact movements, her bank deposits, and the undeniable proof that my signature was forged while I was physically presenting at a corporate seminar surrounded by 50 federal regulators. He calmly informed her that the county registry and a team of aggressive civil litigators were quietly cross-checking her entire operational history. The sheer, suffocating terror of a federal prison sentence broke the woman immediately. Within 48 hours of that brief conversation, Lydia was sitting in our soundproof conference room, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Under the crushing, absolute weight of impending legal ruin, she formally confessed on the record. She admitted she had never met me on the day she stamped the corporate amendment. She confessed that Mallory had handed her a pre-prepared stack of forged documents, along with a thick envelope of untraceable cash, to simply look the other way. Her sworn, notarized affidavit was the ultimate silver bullet. It completely destroyed the legal validity of the hostile corporate takeover. Yet, the most devastating revelation of the entire investigation did not come from the terrified notary. It came from Adrian a few days later, buried deep within the recovered metadata of the original trust documents. He called me into his office, his expression unusually grim, entirely lacking his usual predatory smirk. "We finally tracked the absolute origin of the Wakefield Family Trust Charter," Adrian said, his voice quiet and cautious. "I always operated under the assumption that Mallory drafted the corporate restructure and simply manipulated your aging parents into going along with the theft. I thought she was the sole mastermind." He turned his large computer monitor toward me. "I was entirely wrong. The initial email correspondence with the predatory offshore lawyers who designed this trust structure did not originate from your sister." I leaned forward and read the name on the sender line of the printed emails. The breath left my lungs. It was my father. My vision narrowed to a pinpoint as I read the attached messages. The emails detailed my father explicitly proposing the structural model to strip my voting rights. He wrote to the lawyers that his youngest daughter was entirely too independent, inherently selfish, and lacked proper respect for family hierarchy. He expressed a profound, paranoid fear that because I held the absolute deed, I would one day simply sell the estate and leave the family completely destitute to further my own corporate career. He did not just blindly sign the papers Mallory shoved in front of him, he was the chief architect. He actively engineered the theft of my property because he fundamentally believed I had absolutely no right to own anything that did not directly serve his comfort. Reading his cold, calculating words brutally murdered the very last, pathetic illusion I held in my heart. For weeks, I had desperately clung to the tiny hope that my parents were simply naive, emotional victims held hostage by a manipulative older sister. I wanted to believe they were just foolish. The emails proved they were willing, enthusiastic co-authors of my destruction. The emotional shock instantly crystallized into pure weaponized strategy. I transitioned completely from playing a defensive victim to actively hunting my prey. I instructed Adrian to quietly file an emergency petition in the state superior court. We officially requested the immediate appointment of an independent, court-ordered receiver to completely seize legal control of Briar House. We also requested a total, immediate freeze on all corporate revenue, specifically targeting the incoming investment funds from the upcoming masquerade. But the true genius of the legal strike was in the meticulous timing. I specifically instructed Adrian to coordinate with the sympathetic judge to ensure the emergency order was officially signed and executed precisely 1 hour before the gala was scheduled to begin. We would not stop the party from happening. We would let the room fill completely with their wealthy targets before we dropped the absolute ceiling on their heads. Simultaneously, I prepared a massive, devastating aftershock. I spent hours alone in my office compiling a flawless, undeniable digital dossier. It contained the crystal-clear audio recording of my father toasting to my absence on the porch, the digital forensic report proving my signature was a complete fabrication, the sworn confession from the terrified notary, and the frantic financial records proving Mallory stole from innocent brides. I packaged this digital bomb perfectly. It was ready to be dispatched simultaneously to the civil court docket, the local authorities, and the inbox of every single major investigative journalist in the state. I did not send it yet. I kept my finger hovering patiently over the trigger, waiting for the perfect moment of maximum destruction. The night before the Winter Masquerade Gala, I sat entirely alone in my dark city apartment. I turned off all the interior lights. I poured myself a single glass of cold water and stared out the massive window at the pitch-black, freezing ocean crashing violently against the distant harbor walls. For over 10 years, I had exhausted my soul playing the role of the reliable, good daughter. I had sacrificed my own peace, my youth, and my financial security to constantly build warm, comfortable shelters for people who secretly despised me. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the absolute silence of the empty room wrap around me like a heavy suit of armor. I looked at the dark sea and made a final, silent promise to myself. Tomorrow night, I would no longer play the loyal, suffering victim of their story. I would not be the tragic collateral damage of their endless greed. When the crystal chandeliers turned on and the music started playing at my stolen house, I would walk through those heavy iron doors. This time, I would not be arriving late. I would be arriving right on time, stepping into the brilliant light as the sole surviving witness to the absolute, magnificent ruin of my own family. The Winter Masquerade Gala at Briar House was an absolute masterpiece of stolen funds and fabricated luxury. As I stood concealed in the freezing shadows just beyond the grand entrance, the heavy mahogany doors muffled the sophisticated sounds of a live string quartet playing an elegant waltz. The sweeping lawns were bathed in the soft, golden glow of thousands of expensive landscape lights. Through the towering glass windows, I could see the city's wealthy elite, local business partners, and the highly targeted Connecticut investment syndicate mingling beneath the crystal chandeliers. Several local society reporters, invited exclusively to document my sister's glorious triumph, drifted through the crowd with champagne flutes in their hands. Right at the stroke of 9 o'clock in the evening, the music gently faded. Mallory stepped up to a small, velvet-draped podium at the head of the grand dining room. She looked exactly like the undisputed lady of the manor, wearing a custom emerald gown and a delicate silver mask that caught the light perfectly. She raised her glass, her voice projecting brightly through the room's newly installed audio system. She spoke eloquently about family legacy, about building a premier hospitality empire from the ground up, and about the massive, multi-million-dollar expansion phase they were launching tonight. And so, Mallory announced, her smile radiant and completely artificial, I invite our esteemed lead partners to step forward and sign the formal funding pledges. Tonight, we officially open the next magnificent chapter of Briar House. I did not wait for the applause to begin. I pushed the heavy double doors open with enough force that the brass handles slammed violently against the interior walls. The sharp, echoing crack instantly killed the celebratory mood. The entire room froze in absolute shock. I walked straight into the blinding warmth of the gala, flanked perfectly by Adrian Vale on my right, Naomi Price on my left, and a uniformed county civil enforcement officer marching solidly right behind us. Mallory lowered her glass, her jaw visibly dropping. My mother gasped loudly, clutching her chest, while my father took a sudden, unstable step backward, knocking over a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres. "Violet," Mallory stammered, frantically trying to recover her composure and spin the narrative for the wealthy audience. "What on earth are you doing? This is a private, ticketed event. If you are having another one of your emotional episodes, we can discuss it in private." Adrian did not even give her the satisfaction of a direct response. He bypassed her entirely, stepping directly to the center of the room and raising his voice to a commanding, theatrical boom that demanded absolute silence. By order of the State Superior Court, signed precisely 1 hour ago by the presiding judge, the operational rights of Wakefield Harbor Holdings are hereby suspended, Adrian announced, handing the massive stack of legal injunctions directly to the bewildered lead investor from Connecticut. The fraudulent corporate amendment stripping the original founder of her equity is temporarily invalidated. Furthermore, every single dollar of revenue generated by this event, including all pending investor commitments, is officially frozen and seized by a court-appointed receiver effective immediately. The uniformed officer stepped forward, officially serving the thick manila envelope of court documents right onto Mallory's podium. The room erupted into a chaotic, panicked murmur. Mallory grabbed the microphone, her voice shrill and desperate. "Do not listen to them. This is just a pathetic, jealous sister trying to ruin a legitimate business deal because she is completely unstable." "If I am unstable," I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a frozen blade, "then let us look at the facts together." Naomi walked briskly to the audiovisual control table at the edge of the room. She shoved the hired technician aside, plugged her secure laptop directly into the system, and hijacked the massive presentation screen Mallory had intended to use for her architectural renderings. The beautiful images of coastal pavilions vanished instantly. In their place, Naomi projected the undeniably damning evidence in high definition. The entire room of wealthy investors stared at a massive, 10-foot-tall image of the forged corporate amendment side by side, with the digital timestamp proving I was delivering a presentation to federal regulators at the exact moment I supposedly signed the papers. Adrian clicked to the next slide. It was the sworn, notarized confession of Lydia Kersey, highlighting the specific paragraph where she admitted to taking a cash bribe to validate the fake documents. But the deception does not stop at internal corporate theft, Adrian continued, pacing like a predator in front of the stunned crowd. The screen shifted again. This time, it displayed a horrifyingly clear financial schematic. It meticulously traced the exact wire transfers of 3 separate, non-refundable cash deposits from innocent spring brides. The bright red arrows on the screen showed those specific funds bypassing the legitimate business accounts entirely and flowing directly into the payments for tonight's extravagant catering, imported wine, and Mallory's custom evening gown. The silence in the room was no longer just shocked. It was entirely suffocating. The guests were looking at raw, undeniable proof of a massive commercial Ponzi scheme. "You stole our deposits," a woman whispered from the back of the room. It was the local floral vendor, standing near the catering doors with wide, terrified eyes. "You paid me with stolen money." Mallory was hyperventilating, her perfectly contoured face turning a blotchy, panicked red. My father rushed forward, holding his hands up in a desperate, placating gesture. "Please, everyone, please," my father begged, his corporate authority completely shattering into pathetic pieces. "This is just a massive misunderstanding over internal accounting. We can step into the study and explain everything privately. Violet, please, you are destroying the family." "No," I replied, standing my ground with absolute, unshakable calm. "I am just finishing the story you started." I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it directly up to the microphone on the podium. I pressed play. The pristine, unedited audio recording from that freezing night on the porch echoed through the grand dining room. My father's booming voice filled the silent space, raising a glass and saying, "Tonight is finally peaceful, because Violet is not here to control everything." Then came Mallory's toxic, familiar laugh, followed by her undeniable confession. "And it is a good thing, too, because there are a few signatures tonight that she really should not see." The atmosphere in the room shifted from confused curiosity to absolute, visceral disgust. The mask of the loving, misunderstood family completely dissolved, leaving only the ugly, undeniable truth of their greed. The lead investor from Connecticut did not say a single word. He simply dropped his crystal glass onto a cocktail table, turned on his heel, and walked straight out the front door, taking his entire syndicate with him. The massive financial deal died right there on the hardwood floor. 2 different vendors immediately approached the civil officer, loudly demanding to file formal police reports for stolen services. In the far corner, I watched a local reporter rapidly typing a breaking news alert into her phone before slipping quietly out the side exit. The scandal was already hitting the press before the night was even over. My mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing loudly and dramatically into her hands. But for the very first time in my entire life, nobody rushed over to comfort her. No one in that room looked at my parents as tragic, unfortunate victims. They were finally seen exactly for what they were: unmasked frauds. 4 months later, the absolute reality of their actions caught up with them in a heavily air-conditioned county courthouse. The judge was entirely merciless. Mallory faced severe felony charges for commercial wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and forgery. My parents, completely unable to feign ignorance due to their documented email correspondence, were held strictly liable in civil court. They permanently lost all residency rights to Briar House and were legally forced to liquidate their remaining retirement assets to help pay the massive court-ordered restitution to the defrauded brides and angry vendors. When the final gavel struck the wooden block, concluding the absolute destruction of their lives, I did not cheer. I did not pump my fists in the air or deliver a dramatic, gloating speech in the courtroom hallway. I simply signed the final recovery documents, handed them to Adrian, and drove back to the coast. I stood alone on the wide mahogany porch of Briar House. The extravagant iron gates had been completely removed. The commercial lighting was turned off. The estate was quiet again. I leaned against the sturdy wooden railing, pulling my coat tight against the bitter wind, and stared out at the freezing, slate-gray winter ocean. The profound, heavy weight that had crushed my chest for over a decade was completely gone. As I listened to the waves crashing against the distant rocks, I finally realized the truth. My ultimate victory was not found in watching my family lose their money or their freedom. The real victory was the quiet, absolute peace of knowing that I was finally entirely free. I would never again be the walking wallet in their twisted story. I was just Violet, and for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. Thank you for listening to this story. Please let me know where you are listening from in the comments, so we can connect and share our thoughts. I invite you to subscribe to the Helena Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and show your support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.